Good afternoon and happy Wednesday, folks. William Tramp, also known as This Effin' GM here, ready to talk to you about Encounter Party. Encounter Party Episode 9 aired last night, January 2nd, 2024? We're already in a new year. Goodness gracious. Well, I watched the episode, and I have a lot I'd like to say about it, but before I do, I should probably mention there's going to be spoilers in this episode. There's always spoilers in my recaps and my reviews and my thoughts about Encounter Party, but, I always like to mention at the beginning, just in case you're new. If you are new and you don't really want to get into the whole spoilers, or you want to catch up, maybe you might want to check out my review of episode 1 and start from there. I've got a whole playlist just in case you're not wanting to bounce around to 50 of my other types of videos. I do a lot on this channel, don't I? With that stated, I think it's a good time to get started. So go ahead and hit it, Tommy! What do you mean he's lost? When we packed up the old shelves, we accidentally packed away Tommy? Oh, that's an HR nightmare. Episode 9, The Corpse Dungeon, starts off with the party about to enter the Corpse Dungeon. What is the Corpse Dungeon? Well, if you remember me talking about this in my last recap, or if you saw the episode, then you know that I am absolutely in love with a giant terrain piece that was set in the middle of the table. This terrain piece is phenomenal. It's a three-dimensional rendering of a giant skeleton that's like rising up out of this bog. It's phenomenal. I love to use 3D printed and crafted elements in my games, and seeing that particular set piece put down on the table was just, oh, I love it so much. Now, granted, it's one of those pieces that, because it's a giant skeleton coming out of a box, it's one of those things that can only really be used like one time. Although, granted, if I had something like that, I would be trying to find reasons to toss that in all the time. Hey, turns out the world is filled with giant skeletons rising out of bogs. That's kind of the danger of using really cool terrain set pieces. Visually, they're stunning. The problem is you just don't have a place to store them and all that jazz. So this works really well for a television show, but maybe not so much for your home game. You know what? Never mind. We should all get one. So let's talk about the episode. So the party is now headed into the the femur bone of this giant skeleton. So it's kind of hollowed out, right? Like a cave system. Now we'll remember that as they arrived to the corpse dungeon, that there were all kinds of bodies lying around, specifically bodies of the Longstriders, which is Vin's mercenary company that's been disbanded, and also bodies bearing the attire of the Future, which we're not quite sure what the Future is all about, but I'm beginning to think that it may be a cult. As they enter the corpse dungeon, we get the delightful joy of trying to figure out light sources. Good old classic Dungeons and Dragons. Who's holding the light source, right? Most of this episode, and this should probably be said, most of this episode is a combat. Because the episodes are only 48 minutes long, combats in Dungeons and Dragons tend to take a while, and most of this episode is taken up by a giant combat. Because as they enter this bone and they start to go up the rise and over the knee, they are assaulted by a collection of phase spiders. Great ambush predators, because, imagine you're walking down a dark hall and then suddenly spider the size of a horse, and then it's gone. It's the stuff of my nightmares. Because we had this large combat, most of the episode is going to be taken up by this. So, and I feel that it may not be the best idea for me to narrate round by round exactly what happened in the combat, although I did actually write it all down. That's what I do when I watch the show. I just sit there writing notes for each individual action that's being taken, right? I'm not going to do that, but I will kind of touch on some highlights from each of the characters. We'll start off with Asher. Asher goes ahead and starts, laying down a barrage of evocation spells. She's throwing firebolts. She's throwing magic missiles. I love the way that she flavors these spells. The firebolts are being, in this particular case, are being explained as like heat vision. So she's pulling a Cyclops, running around just shooting fire blasts at everybody. I know Cyclops doesn't use fire. It's pure concussive force, but you get the idea. And then also whenever she casts magic missiles, she has this frog bag and she just opens it up and like missiles are just flying out of the frog bag, which I think was pretty neat. Let's see. Let's talk about Olivina. Olivina gets taken down pretty fast. Those spiders not only deal a lot of piercing damage with their bites, but they also pump their victims full of poison. Now, luckily for Olivina, being pumped full of poison isn't a huge deal because, much like the Lord of the Rings spiders, when a character falls to the poison, they don't die, they just go into kind of more of a paralytic state. Now the cool thing though about this happening for to Olivina is that we get a chance to see Olred shine, because as her character is down, Sarah then turns her attention to using Olred as her primary way to function in combat. And not only do we get to really finally see a close-up of that delightful little red panda owlbear miniature, but we also get to see Olred like start, kicking ass and taking names, right? But eventually she does get brought back up by Dridian, and she's able to escape with her, life still intact. Dridian spends a lot of his time armoring up when he casts Shield of Fate that kind of forms like wooden antlers around his body, kind of providing an extra level of defense. I really like how Andrew explains his Oath of the Ancients paladin abilities. Dridian spends a good chunk of his time making sure that people stay up. He goes over to Olivina and casts Lay on Hands to bring her back, and generally trying to protect the others in the group. He does get a couple of swings off, but unfortunately Paladin's, big heavy hit is really centered around the Divine Smite ability, and phase spiders just don't provide that opportunity. Let's talk about the phase spiders for a second, because this was very much reminiscent of Baldur's Gate 3, although to be fair, this episode was recorded before Baldur's Gate 3 was officially released. A wink. As they're in this bone cave, kind of trying to take on all these phase spiders who kind of come in waves, right? So like some will phase out and more will phase back in, so it's really hard to like focus fire. We get the delightful moment of the Hive Mother appearing. Now, these phase spiders, are represented by these beautiful miniatures that were put onto the train. Oh, I should have mentioned this. When they're having the combat, by the way, Ryan removed the top of the bone, so that way it reveals the cave structure, and you can see the players moving around on this train. To go along with this beautiful train, they had some beautiful miniatures of these phase spiders, and I gotta say, I would absolutely love to have access to those sculpts, because the not only do they look neat, but also like the Hive Mother's like coming down, posed in such a way to where when you put this giant brood mother next to a miniature, it looks like she's kind of looming over them, but also while like kind of crawling down something. It was fantastic. It again, visual spectacle. And it reminds me a lot of Baldur's Gate 3, because there's that whole thing, spoilers, there's that whole thing down the well, when you go down the well in that little town that the goblins are kind of, hanging out in. And there's the brood mother, the phase spider brood mother, and then a bunch of phase spiders that you got to take out. It didn't take long for many of the spiders and the brood mother to be taken down, but because there's just so many of them, this combat became really overwhelming for the players. Luckily, though, the players had some heavy hitters on their side. So another highlight I should mention is Tolo. Tolo is a wild magic barbarian, so whenever Tolo rages, there's some sort of weird magical effect that goes off, and this time it was this giant black tentacle, I guess, that erupted from Tolo and starts swinging about, dealing a ton of necrotic damage, and then Tolo's running around using Great Weapon Master while raging to just deal intense amount of damage. I think Tolo specifically was responsible for the death of 3 or 4 of the spiders. It was a lot of fun to watch. Barbarians, they know what they're doing. I think Kari had a wonderful line when that big bad tentacle comes out of him. Kari has Tolo say the line, he's caught in a bad necromance, and I just thought that was kind of funny. I hope that becomes a little GIF, because I would probably use it at least 3 times in the next year. I don't know how often a GIF is supposed to be used to be successful, but anyway, let me continue on. Tolo also spends a lot of his time trying to, kind of hold the line, like block off the escape, so that keep the enemies from being able to, follow the characters as they are escaping, because they're sliding down the femur bone to escape this combat, and a number of them do decide to do that, and Tolo's sort of holding the line towards the end, trying to ensure that the enemy doesn't pursue. Then of course is a human fighter, which some, for many people, the human fighter is the most boring class combination. Me personally, I love it, because that free feat combined with the sheer amount of things a Battle Master fighter can do really can open up your options. And David proved to us all the reason why Polar Master is a feat. Polar Master and Sentinel, actually, both of those are feats that reign supreme. Because throughout this entire combat, we were seeing Ven get the opportunity to just wail on things left and right. He'd miss with the head, but then you get a free attack with the butt. People would phase rushers would start moving around, and he's starting to use Sentinel to lock them down. Of course, they teleport, so it's not super effective, right? But it's still pretty fun. Speaking of wailing on things, Flick for a moment. Flick spent most of his combat wailing on my hopes and dreams. What do I mean by that? Well, Flick spent a lot of the combat doing what bards and rogues do. Sneak attacking, casting spells that help out, and there may have been a bardic inspiration tossed in there at one point. The main thing that we need to know is that Flick spent most of his time completely dispelling any last bit of the theory that he may be secretly a warlock out of my mind. I've lost. You win, Ned. You got me. I think one of my favorite Flick moments was there's a point in which Flick is trying to get to the slide to get out of there because team leader Vernon is saying, hey, let's get out of here, because team leader Vernon did absolutely nothing to help the situation other than run away. And Flick at one point, slides underneath a phase spider while cutting, across it. Real classic rogue stuff, right? Real classic slide and slash. So I thought that was a good time. So that part almost made up for the fact that Flick has ruined my dreams of warlocks. Again, thanks, Ned. Ultimately, the combat ends when the Broodmother is taken down, but a large number of phase spiders are still popping in and out, trying to take them down, so the group all just escapes, sliding down that femur. I think at one point, Tolo even offers to toss Olivina, and I think this is an important moment to mention, because when Tolo, declares that they're going to throw Olivina down the femur slide, or a thigh slide. I don't know bones very well. Brian actually stops and makes sure that Sarah is okay with her character being handled like that. And Sarah was definitely cool with getting out of that situation. But this really highlights an important thing about playing any game, which is, as much as you can get a cool idea in your head about how things can go, if it involves other characters, consent is absolutely the key. And Brian was sure to make sure that consent was playing a part of the process. This is not to say that Kari was trying to do something that Sarah wouldn't have been okay with, but I just enjoy Brian showing that on camera. That commitment to, hey, let's make sure when we interact with other players' characters that we get the A-OK. So fantastic practice, you guys. Well, after the combat is over, the group re-meets somewhere around, I guess, the pelvis area, and heals up, and Vernon tells them that they need to continue to travel up the spine of the creature, and so they do so. Now, what I love about this is that then Brian removes the rib cage, and there's a whole section of where you can see the minis going up the spine, but then also opening up into this gigantic cavern. In the cavern, they find a horrible scene. There are bodies of Longstriders and members of the future everywhere. We see that in the middle of all of this, they behold a big monstrous corpse, a gigantic orb with a number of stalks with little eyes coming off of it. Get it? Behold? Because it's a beholder. Amongst this mess, they also find what I guess they were looking for, which is a sword. Not the sword that Dridian was looking for, but some sort of magic sword. The sword is stuck in the body of the beholder, which, it's kind of like a sword in the stone moment, right? Except for, way creepier. The group begins to investigate. So Vin heads over to the Longstrider bodies and discovers, quite unfortunately, the body of his father. We get a little bit of, some sort of closure in this, I guess, because Vin now has an answer for why his father's torch was out, but it's a pretty upsetting moment, finding your father dead in the middle of a large monstrous cavern. It's a moment. Meanwhile, Dridian heads over to the sword. We see that there's a headband, very similar to the headband that Dridian has been carrying around, draped over the sword's hilt, which leads us to believe that we're starting to see some connections coming in from Dridian's mysterious backstory and the situation that's happening right now. Well, as he goes for the sword, Vernon recommends that nobody but Flick touches that sword. And here is where we start to get some insight into Flick. You see, the sword is very likely cursed, and Flick is a specialist in these sort of situations. At least that's what he claims. We don't get a lot more information, but we're starting to see something about Flick forming. Flick goes over to grab the sword, and as he does so, the body of the beholder chomps down and begins to rise off of the floor. Undead beholder time, ladies and gentlemen. And that is how the episode ends. This is a good episode. It's an exciting episode. There's a lot of combat and a lot of people, using their cool, awesome Dungeons and Dragons ability. There weren't a lot of answers, though, in this episode. It kind of feels that the Corpse Dungeon is really like part one of whatever. But that's okay. So I have some thoughts I'd like to give about it. Thoughts that I think, the things I found good about the episode, the things I found not so good about the episode. And then I want to talk about my theories, as well as add in a little bit about some theories that have either been proven incorrect that I've had in the past, or theories that have been proven correct, because things keep happening even when the episode's not on. So let's go ahead and talk about those things. Okay, so first of all, when Olivina starts to cast spells, this is something I like, by the way. When Olivina starts to cast spells, we did learn who the goddess that she praises in, because she doesn't apparently kind of fall in line with the whole idea that her, new masters, I guess you would call, the idea of like godless healing. She actually has chosen a god. She's chosen Mylaki, the unicorn goddess of forgotten realms, or forests and woodlands and such. It's the same god that Drizzt Do'Urden, I say Drizzt, that's just how I say it. Drizzt Do'Urden praises in the the Icewind Dale series, and the 400 other series that the Drow Elf is a part of. So that was kind of neat. I really like how into it that the group gets. When there's a combat, the group gets very animated. The actors really get into what's happening here. And I think that's just a general kind of part of Dungeons & Dragons. Combats are exciting, obviously, because, hey, things are happening, your character might die. There's danger here. But also it's a lot of the abilities that characters gain in this game tend to be very combat focused. So while role-playing is a lot of fun, and I'm not going to say they don't have fun role-playing, I will say that you finally really get to see the choices that you have made during your character creation and your character's leveling up. You finally really get to see those choices come to life in combat. Some will say that Dungeons & Dragons is mainly a combat engine. I've given my own thoughts over here as to why this may be, but overall it's good. I love watching the cast get as excited as they get. I mentioned this before. Another good thing, Brian having the little consent mention in there, making sure that the group is, when one player character does something that involves another player character that might not be 100% they want. I like that Brian made sure that consent was there. Because again, I think consent is wildly important in tabletop role-playing games, because we're all playing this game together. And the last thing I would want to do as a player or as a dungeon master is create a situation in which a player felt uncomfortable at the table. And one of the easiest ways to make people feel uncomfortable at the table is to have other players gain agency over your character. And that's a situation we typically want to avoid. So, solid move, Brian. Explanations for the way that the characters presented their combat actions were a lot of fun to watch. Kari had some colorful explanations for how reckless attack worked, which I thought was just fun. Of course, as always, Asher's explanation of magic is always something I find quite delightful. Heat ray vision and frog bag. I'm all about that frog bag. Okay, if you ever get into merchandising and counterparty people, that frog bag that's the one. And obviously the terrain and the miniatures. I had a lot to say about it. I will always have a lot to say about terrain and miniatures. I just love seeing three-dimensional spaces come to life, and that corpse dungeon was just fantastic. So I'm really looking forward to seeing next episode and seeing where else we can go with this. One last thing I want to mention. While this episode was going on, there was a little pop-up that appeared, like a little graphic that appeared to explain to us at home what Reckless Attack does and how it works. And I actually really enjoy that. I know enough about Dungeons & Dragons to where I don't need every single ability explained to me by the cast members. I feel like that would waste a lot of time if everything's being explained. Of course there's going to be clarifications here and there, but, we don't need to treat the audience like they're idiots. But I do think that those graphics graphics that explain the abilities are a really nice way to sort of meet people in the middle. You're not taking away time from the actual play to explain these things, but you are still giving people at home the information as to how these things work, how some of these abilities work, so they can understand, contextually what's going on. So I thought that was a really good move. On that note, I would like to now transition to talking about things I wish we would have seen. I want to see more of those graphics. Now, I don't want to see the entire screen being taken up by graphics. Explaining every single detail. I do understand that would be really frustrating, and that would kind of, things would get lost. It's like watching VH1 behind the music, right? Eventually, you just stop seeing the people. Instead, you see 1,000 pop-ups that are overlaid over it. But spells, I think, would be a really good idea. Really good thing to showcase how spells work, because magic is fantastic. It's interesting, but it is bound by rules, and I think it would be really useful to show us at home exactly kind of what these spells are doing. That's just my own personal opinion. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about some theories that this episode has created, or questions that I have. The headband, right? What is this headband about? We see two separate symbols. One is the symbol that Dridian has on his headband, which is the closed eye, and then we see the symbol of the futures, which seems very similar, same coloring, similar eye-like motif, but the eye is like opening. So again, I'm very curious as to how this happened. In fact, I'm really curious if there's to me, it's obvious that there's a connection between the future and whoever Dridian is hunting. And I've given my theory about this before, that maybe the future is like an advancement of whatever organization Dridian is trying to hunt down, like its next form, right? The next iteration. One thing we don't know is how long Dridian has been hunting them down. Maybe this organization has been around for hundreds of years, and Dridian has been hunting them for hundreds of years. So things would naturally evolve, although I don't actually think that's the case. Another question I have is, so it was made clear to us that the future and the Longstriders did not arrive to this area at the same time, but I do think it's interesting that in this large cavernous area, we do find the bodies of both and this one giant monster. Now, it's possible that what happened is maybe the future came in first, tried to fight the monster, failed, the Longstriders came in, tried to fight the monster, succeeded, but at great cost, and lost all their lives, and that's what created this situation. But it's just interesting to me that there's these two groups separated by time, and I'm kind of curious on how much of an impact that's going to have on the story. So I'm really looking forward to seeing as the party kind of figures out more information about this. Ven's father's death. I'm very curious on what direction this is going to cause David to take Ven. Losing a father is a big deal, and something that I have somewhat of an experience with myself, and I am interested to see if that sort of moment is going to have a deep impact on Ven's actions moving forward. Flick. All right, so Flick and the cursed items. What is this about Flick and cursed items? So my theory right now is that Flick may be what I like to call a curse eater. He absorbs the bad magic into himself, and this is why he's sent out to deal with cursed items, why he's the specialist. So I'm looking forward to learning more about that, and this would probably explain a lot of the things that I attributed to maybe being a warlock. Let's go ahead now and shift gears here. I'm going to add a new segment here. We're going to talk about theories I've already had. There's two things I want to talk about that I've already kind of made mention of that we now have clarification for. Number one is Fleck and the Warlock. I keep mentioning that, but I will kind of put that over here in the category of this is officially debunked. I was wrong. So Flick is most certainly not a warlock. I don't really know what the answer is here, but Ned's wasn't trying to trick me by having his character classes listed there. Dang it! All right, that's fine. Again, I still love the character, so. It's just hard to let go. The second thing I want to talk about is the personification of Tolo by Kari Payton. I had mentioned a few recaps ago that I was curious if the character of Tolo was a stand-in for the transgender experience. And Kari Payton, while not having done this on the show, has admitted on Twitter, has kind of let everyone know that Tolo is in fact based off of Kari's own experience with his trans son, and that Tolo is sort of an homage to, I guess homage, I'm using the wrong word, a tribute. I like tribute better, as a tribute to his son. And I think that's freaking great. I think that's absolutely wonderful. I really like how Kari has presented this. I really enjoy the character of Tolo, and I am head over heels for the idea of creating a character that is a tribute to someone that you love and care about, and it's very clear that Kari cares about his son, and I just think that's wonderful. I really do. I truly think that's wonderful. Okay, that's it. That was the episode. I want to thank you so much for joining me on my discussion, my late discussion. Again, sorry this episode came out a bit later than I had expected, because this recap came out later than I expected. All my kids are home from winter break right now, so my brain is like turning into mush. Anyway, thank you for joining me for Encounter Party episode 9. The next episode of Encounter Party is going to air at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the Dungeons & Dragons Adventures Network, which can be found on Freevee or Plex. Sorry, I'm trying to look up the date here, and my calendar got all weird. The next episode is going to air on January 9th, 2024, so 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Again, if you haven't joined the Discord yet for Encounter Party, I highly recommend joining it. It's a good time. There's a lot of great people there talking about these episodes and talking about other things, too. I'm not being paid or asked to talk about this. I just enjoy being there, so I like to share my theories there, and I like to talk to people about the show. They're a lot of cool people. What else? Oh, yeah, I guess on a personal note, so get out of here. On a more personal note, thank you. I just want to say that I have a lot of fun making these episodes. I know that I've been kind of wishy-washy on some of the schedule lately. Again, life just gets tough, but hey, I'm still here to give out this information to share my enjoyment of the show with you. I do have a Patreon, which is, if you want to join that would be cool. I add in like a lot of discussions about adventures I'm writing and such. It doesn't really matter. It just helps keep some of this stuff going. Like helps pay for new shelves. You might have noticed, by the way, that my background is completely different and isn't falling apart as I'm talking to you. I don't really care if you join the Patreon. I mean, it'd be cool if you did, but I'm not going to belabor that point anymore. What I would like, if you did, is if you hit the subscribe button and then hit that like button, because that really does help me out getting this particular series as well as other things that I work on out there in the ether. Okay, that's it. That's all I had to say. So thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you all next week.